Tonight, though, I'm delighted to welcome our first week instructor, writer-in-residence Elizabeth Hand, one of American literature's finest prose poets of the fantastic. Her gorgeous language and incandescent prose is evident in all that she writes, from her poetic, myth-saturated literary fantasies to her most recent thrillers. While she's written in many genres, science fiction, urban fantasy, young adult fantasy, realism with a twist, noir, some themes remain. She is a visionary writer with a long-standing interest in outsider artists and people finding their way in lonely landscapes in big cities. Author of numerous novels and short fiction collections, the newest one is here, which looks amazing, Errantry. Her fiction has received the Nebula World Fantasy, Mythiopic, Tiptree, and International Horror Guild Awards, and her novels have been chosen as the New York Times and Washington Post notable books. Publishers Weekly just named the most recent novel, Available Dark, one of the top 10 mystery thrillers of the season. Please welcome Elizabeth Hand.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Is this good? Yes? No? Closer? Up? How's that? Is that better?
Drop it and then angle the mic up. There we go. Angle the mic.
How's that? Is that good? All right. Well, I'm thrilled to be here. I love Seattle. Seattle is the only place I draw a crowd. Seattle and Finland, so I'm always happy to go to those two places. I really do love Seattle. I first came here, I don't know, 16 or 17 years ago to teach at Clarion West. This is my third time teaching here, and I love it. I can truly say it is always one of it. Now there's three of them, but some of the peak experiences of my life have been here. Working with these remarkable young writers, some of them in the room from the past and the new group that's here now, it is really such a privilege and an honor to be able to do that. So for all of you who support Clarion in various ways, you're really doing a good thing. I am going to read from a not very lyrical novel in progress. I'm going to read from the third Cassanieri novel, which I'm working on now, which is the tentative title is Flashburn. This is the first time I have read it anywhere, so you're all very fortunate or not, depending. So if it's a little rough in places, be gentle with me. I've practiced it, but I haven't read it before an audience before. And the other ones I'm much more polished with, but I thought it'd be more fun to try something like this here, since all of the students at Clarion are having to do it. So I'm going to try it. This is from Flashburn. The first novel featuring Cassanieri was Generation Loss, and then Available Dark. And this is the third one. These are noir novels. They're thrillers. They tend to be dark. There's not really any fantastical element at all, although it draws from some of the other sources that my other work does. The I who is speaking here is Cassanieri, who is late 40s, burned out, one-time punk photographer who had was sort of a cause celeb for 15 minutes in the 1970s, had kind of an influential book of transgressive photos, and she almost immediately flamed out. And ever since then, she's been just about living on the skids downtown New York City. And she's an alcoholic. She's a chronic drug user. And she has a lot of issues. She's sort of a borderline sociopath. But we like her. So as this book begins, she's just arrived in London. She's there on a stolen passport, a stolen Swedish passport. And she's never been to London before. She is planning to meet an old lover and friend of hers named Quinn, who is a criminal, a murderer, sometime hitman for the Russian mob. And they had met each other after being parted for many decades. They got together again. It's really kind of a sappy romance. The sociopath and the hitman. So anyway, Cass has just arrived in London, she's supposed to meet Quinn somewhere. She went where she was supposed to meet him. He wasn't there, so she doesn't really know what to do. She doesn't know anyone there. She does have some money. The previous night, she hooked up with a young woman named Evie, who's kind of an Amy Winehouse analog, a young English singer, British singer. And, hooked up with her, went home, slept with her, and Evie's passed out somewhere. So Cass is just awakened in Evie's bed. So this is from Flashburn. "That doesn't look very comfortable," a voice intoned. I turned. An extraordinarily tall man leaned against the wall and stared down at me, amused. "Don't panic," he said. "I'm harmless unless provoked." I wasn't sure whether to believe him. He was 6.5 feet tall, with a black morning coat and black pleated trousers over black pointy-toed leather boots, so highly polished they reflected the hand he extended to me, long-fingered and so white it looked bleached. His face was pale, wearily handsome, dark eyes, strong chin, with a wry, thin-lipped mouth that gave him the air of an actor accustomed to making the best of a badly written, long-planging role. Both his height and appearance were enhanced by a top hat tall enough to hide a rabbit standing on its hind legs. "Adrian Carlyle." The world-weary voice was coupled with a disconcertingly limp handshake. "I'm a friend of Evie's. I assume she's beneath the laundry somewhere." "I don't know. Yeah, I guess." I looked around. "Is there even a bedroom in this place?" Adrian inclined his head toward a mirrored door. "The Salagrio lies yon. Cigarette?" He held out an alligator leather cigarette case. "No, thanks." He withdrew an electric cigarette, sucked at it, then exhaled a thread of periwinkle smoke. I grabbed my bag. "Bathroom?" Adrian pointed with one ebony-polished fingernail. "There's no hot water." There was no tub either. Only a plastic shower veined with mildew. No medicine cabinet, though one wasn't necessary. As I'd made my way across the room, I'd seen pill bottles everywhere, tossed among clothing on the floor, lined up on shelves beside loose CDs and beer bottles filled with cigarette butts. They were in the bathroom as well, jostling for space in the shower stall, alongside enough hair products to furnish a salon. Some of the pill bottles had Evie's name on the prescription labels. Most did not. And most of the bottles were empty, though I did find one half filled with something called Solidil. I pocketed it and took a shower, drying myself on a kimono. There were no towels, Nat. I dressed, pulling on a striped shirt and a worn black sweater, and went back to the living room. Adrian Carlyle had cleared the couch and enough floor space to sit, his long legs stretched in front of him. "So, which little friend are you?" He nudged at a red lace bra with one pointed winkle picker, neatly flicked his foot so the bra sailed across the room and smacked into the window. "Cass. I just met Evie last night." "And such close friends already." He plucked a shred of lingerie from where I'd been lying on the couch and dropped it on the floor. He removed his stovepipe hat, revealing thin black hair streaked with gray, and meticulously set the hat beside him. "I try to check in on her every day, make sure she has a pulse." I sat on the other end of the couch, reaching to pick up an empty pill bottle. Haldol, 250 milligrams. "She has quite a habit." Adrian raised a white hand that trembled slightly. "Let he who is without stain throw the first stone. I am both stained and stoned." "May I see that?" He took the pill bottle and scrutinized the label, sighing when he saw it was empty. "I once spent an entire day going through this flat with a fine-toothed comb. I found exactly 1 mandrax. Do you think she hides them in the wall? I pulled up the floorboards. There's nothing there." "Maybe," I said. "What's Solidil?" "Codeine and paracetamol." "What's paracetamol?" "Acetaminophen." "Did you find some Solidol?" "No, just curious." "You're lying," said Adrian. "I like that in a girl." I shrugged. "You wouldn't have anything that might help me wake up." Not today, darling. What do they call Ritalin here? Focalin, ADHD, stuff like that. Adrian rubbed his chin. Ritalin's Ritalin. Not sure about the other. You looking to sign on with the NHS? Nah, just tired. We'll all sleep when we're dead, won't we? Here. He withdrew a card case, scrawled something on a white slip of paper, and handed it to me, gathered his hat, and stood. I came to remind Evie there's a party tonight at Ellen O'Connor's. I tried to call, but of course her phone's dead. You're welcome to come. You look like you could use a hot dinner. I'd rather find a drink. Oh, I'm sure Evie has something somewhere if you look hard enough, or you could just squeeze her like a sponge. He tipped his hat to me. Maybe I'll see you later. What time is it? I don't know, 4:30? Jesus. I was supposed to meet someone, only now I'm not sure where to find him. Adrian nodded sympathetically. I know just how you feel. Was it here in Camden? Brixton. But I got the place wrong, or he did. Do you know Derek Haverty? Derek? Sure. That's who you're meeting? He's the barman at the Banshee off the Kentish Town Road. No, it's not him. Someone he knows. I stared at the floor, then at Adrian, wondering if I could trust him. Not yet, I decided. Is he an okay guy, Derek? An okay guy? He did some hard time, if that's what you're after, though he was just a kid then. But I wouldn't step on his Jimmy Shans. He made his way through the midden of clothing to the door, waved without looking back, and left. So she goes to the party, which is in Crouch End. She goes with Evie, and it's a party at the house of a wealthy gangster named Mallow Tierney, who has invited a lot of people there. And it's a birthday party for Mallow's wife, Ellen O'Connor, who is actually a Tuckerized person, character, the name. She's a former model groupie, now in middle age, very well preserved. I don't think you see her in this scene. So anyway, Cass is at the party, doing what she does. I headed for the living room. Music throbbed loud, just loud enough that people needed to raise their voices to talk. Old Darude column, good choice for a crowd that seemed equal parts young boho and big money, with enough grit thrown in to meet the evening's ubiquitous Doc Martens or filthy Converse All-Stars, working the sexy anthropologist look with tribal tattoos and gaudy knitted headwear. It was mobbed enough that I didn't need to make small talk as I elbowed my way to the far wall. Floor-to-ceiling windows ran the entire length of the building with an eye-popping panorama of Crouch End, streets snaking down a steep hill bristling with row houses and shops, illuminated signs for the Gap, Starbucks, American Apparel, jostling with Finest Thai House and the King of Falafel. A steady pulse of red and white lights as traffic surged up and down the high street. On one corner, a down-at-the-heels pub put up a brave fight against gentrification. A clot of smokers clustered around its front door. The view was worth as much as the entire building, but it made me slightly nauseous. Vertigo, and also the sight of all those American corporate logos metastasizing along streets that had been around for a few centuries before the U.S. War for Independence. I turned and fought through the crowd to a long trestle table where a young woman in caterer's livery presided over ranks of wine bottles. Red or white? She asked. Any whiskey? She shook her head. Red, I guess. I downed the glass she gave me. It was good wine. I held my glass out for a refill and knocked it back, then wandered through the room until I found a wide hallway. A man stood there talking on his mobile. Otherwise, it was empty. Large canvases hung on walls painted the muted gray of a mourning dove's plumage. What looked like a genuine Basquiat, a John Cullen portrait of a dementedly smiling society woman with 3 breasts and teeth the size and color of mahjong tiles. Near the end of the hall hung a framed black and white print. A reproduction of a kitschy late 19th century painting, I thought at first. or an illustration removed from some hokey collection of ghost stories, the kind of overpriced ersatz art you find in antique malls or flea markets. The print was slightly askew. I straightened it, stepped back, and frowned. Was it a print? The image was a night scene. A beautiful, naked young woman kneeling before a pool set within a circle of black, leafless trees. Her dark hair spilled around her shoulders as she gazed into the water, and she wore what appeared to be an iron collar around her neck. Her ankles were chained together as well. She had the dopily fearful expression I associate with second-rate Betty Page imitators. The kind of photos you find in bondage magazines from the 1950s. Yet, despite the high cheese factor, there was something disquieting about the image, something that compelled me to continue staring at it, even when my first instinct was to dismissively look away. I drew closer to the frame until my breath fogged the glass. There was a face in the water, gazing back at the woman. At first, it seemed to be nothing but her own reflection. But the longer I stared, the more odd details emerged. Almond-shaped eyes, aquiline nose, a thin mouth, lips parted in an expression between a leer and startled recognition, as though whoever, or whatever, gazed back from the water was more surprised to see the woman than she was to see it. Other faces could be half glimpsed within the skeletal trees. Pinpricks of light to indicate eyes, the silhouette of an up-tilted chin. Most disturbing of all was a spectral gash of white that seemed to hover in the darkness. It hung too high above the trees to be a human face, a niveous gleam resembling a disembodied grim, or the grimace of bared teeth. I took a step back, unnerved, but also amazed. Because it wasn't a print or a lithograph. It was a black and white photograph, one that had undergone hours, perhaps days of post-production work that involved composing a single image from the projection of numerous others, printing it, then altering the emulsion by painting it with oils, scraping with a razor blade, spot dodging and retouching with carbon pencil, pumice stone, powder tone, gum eraser, ink, sable brush. The ink would have come from a stick of Chinese black ground against an inkstone, the purest black available in the first half of the last century, made from the burned shells of black walnuts. The brush would have been fine enough to paint a single hair. The powder tone was made from 2 drawing crayons, Faber's ivory white, ivory black, and burnt sienna, scraped across fine sandpaper. The special emulsion formula would have ensured that the emulsion was hard enough to withstand all this abuse without the print paper tearing. This was in addition to setting up the shoot with lights, models, sets, processing the negs, creating a composite print, then washing, drying, and flattening the paper, all before the real work could even begin. Today, you could digitally reproduce this kind of effect in a matter of minutes, seconds even. In the 1920s and 1930s, it took untold hours and required the obsessive attention of a genius or a nut job. Even before I located his signature near the bottom of the print, I knew it was the former, William Mortensen. Mortensen was a kid from Salt Lake City, a painting prodigy who, in his early 20s, lit out for the territory. In 1918, he joined the Art League in New York, studying under George Bellows. He left when, after 2 years, he was told he had no talent. After a brief stint in Europe, he returned to Utah and in 1921 headed by train to Hollywood. In his care was Vina, a 14-year-old aspiring starlet whose mother had asked Mortensen to act as the girl's chaperone. Mortensen was twice her age. Unsurprisingly, he agreed. In Hollywood, he got work as a set designer and still photographer. He built his own studio above a garage and kept an eye on Vina, ferrying her to auditions and making sure she attended school. Eventually, his teenage charge became his photographic model. Later, she got bit parts in various Hal Roach shorts and dropped her first name to become Fay Ray. After Fay sent her mother some of Mortenson's photos, Ray Mayer headed to Hollywood herself, where she broke every one of the glass negatives that Mortenson had taken of her daughter. Still, Fay Ray always insisted her relationship with Mortenson was purely platonic. Who am I to argue? So, because of time, I'm going to skip through some of the... do you guys want to hear more about William Mortenson? The book's got a lot about William Mortenson. William Mortenson is amazing. All right, I'll tell you about William Mortenson. I first heard of Mortenson around 1980, not long after I started working in the stockroom of the Strand bookstore. This is where she worked for like the last 30 years. She worked in the stockroom of the Strand bookstore. Never got a promotion. She stayed there because of the 5-finger discount. She has a very good collection of expensive photo books. Bob, one of the guys I worked with, was a horror movie aficionado, a fan of Dario Argento, Roger Corman, and early Hammer horror flicks. We were arguing over the merits of Vincent Price's performance in Corman's Pit and the Pendulum as opposed to Christopher Lee's in The Wicker Man. Corman's movie looks like it was shot in a prop shop, I said. And those sets have probably been around for 50 years. I think Lon Chaney was on some of them. Lon Chaney Sr. You are so wrong, Bob retorted. They basically ripped off those designs from William Mortenson, who, incidentally, worked with Lon Chaney Sr. William who? Bob shook his head disdainfully. And you call yourself a transgressive photographer. That was the beginning of my education. I picked up the rest of what I knew about Mortenson over the years when I came upon used copies of his books at the Strand or elsewhere. Back then, I never encountered anyone else who knew of his work except for Bob. So, it goes on to say, I'll kind of go through this quickly. He had a long-running feud with Ansel Adams that was carried on in the pages of Cameracraft magazine and the other members of the F-64 group. Adams famously referred to Mortenson as the Antichrist and a devil. Mortenson responded more coolly, but their feud continued for years in the pages of Cameracraft magazine. Some people say it was all publicity stunt, but there's no doubt that Mortenson's works represented everything that straight photography deplores. Literary inspirations rather than landscapes, often occult or sexually charged subject matter, portraiture. Today, Mortenson looks like a visionary. You can see his fingerprints on the work of artists like Cindy Sherman and Joel Peter Witkin, not to mention every special effects artist working at CGI. But back then, he was the enemy of straight photography anyway. Despite that, or maybe because of it, Mortenson became successful enough that he started his own photography school in Laguna Beach. He published monthly articles in Cameracraft and numerous technical books on photography, illustrated with reproductions of his own photos, many of Meredith, the beautiful woman in the photo I was looking at now, his wife. Most notoriously, his writings became one of the foundations of modern Satanism. Do you want more Mortenson? All right. This book is written to start a Mortenson revival. In 1937, Mortenson published a small spiral-bound book with a color photo of a baby on the cover. It was titled The Command to Look, a formula for picture success. Inside, Mortenson provided a detailed account of his aesthetic philosophy, the hallmarks of which were sex, sentiment, and wonder. His step-by-step instructions for producing a photo relied on a peculiar mixture of pop psychology, technical expertise, and mysticism. Or so Bob told me during one of his periodic screeds on Mortenson, usually precipitated by a Strand customer asking for a book by Ansel Adams. I had to trust Bob's info on this because you can't find The Command to Look anywhere. This despite the fact that it went through numerous printings. There are hardly any copies in libraries either. The most accessible is in Aleister Crowley's holdings in the University of Texas. This is key information. Now and then, a copy surfaces online where it'll set you back about $500. Once, when I was still working at the Strand, a copy made its way to the rare books room. I leafed through it for about 15 minutes before the manager plucked it from my grasp. "This one's spoken for," she said. Next day it was gone. While I've seen a lot of Mortens's work reproduced online, I'd never come across the photo that was in front of me now. That's a queer one, isn't it? I looked aside to see a heavy-set man in loose black trousers, shirtless and barefoot. He was clean-shaven, with a 1/4 inch of impeccably trimmed grizzled hair covering his skull, small bloodshot gray eyes, a thick gold ring in one ear. He looked like Mr. Clean on a bender, or the genies you should never have let out of the bottle. "I'm Mallow Dumfries, and you are?" "Cass." He stared at me pointedly until I added, "Neary." "Delighted to meet you, Cass." His hand tightened over mine, aggressively strong. I tried not to wince. "You found a drink, something to eat?" "Yeah, thanks." "Good." He turned to gaze at the photo. "Good friend gave me that painting, must be 40 years ago. My wife hates it." "It's not a painting." Mallow glanced at me, frowning slightly as I went on. "It's a photo by a guy named William Mortensen. If you look close, you can see he touched it up. But he wanted it to look like a painting," I added quickly. Mallow's frown eased. "Never heard of him." "No one has. He was kind of an oddball, well, his work was. I've never seen this one before. It's probably worth a bit of money." "Really? How much?" "I don't know, a couple $1,000 at least. That would be my guess." Mallow swiveled to eye the photo appraisingly. "I should get it reframed." "I wouldn't. That's probably the original frame. Mortensen would have done it himself. It's worth more if it's intact." Now the appraising gaze fixed on me. "How do you know all this?" "I'm a photographer. I was, anyway." "Yeah? What else can you tell me?" "Ever hear of Anton LaVey?" Mallow shook his head. "He was the guy who founded the Church of Satan in the 1960s. He was inspired by one of Mortensen's books." I squinted at the photo. Very fine letters were etched into the shadowy background above the trees. If I squinted, I could just make out what they spelled. "Actually, that's the title," I said, and pointed to the words, "The Command to Look." Mallow gazed at the photo. A muscle in his jaw twitched, and I saw his pupils dilate. "Well," he said after a moment, "good to meet you. Enjoy yourself." He nodded, his pale eyes chips of ice in the dim light, and walked toward the living room. All right, I'm going to stop there. Thank you. Now, if any of you happen to find a copy of The Command to Look, you should call me just because it would be important for me to authenticate it for you. Because probably it's a worthless reprint, and I'll, buy it from you cheap. So, any questions?
It's a real book, right?
It's a real book. It's a real guy. He was quite a fascinating person, a photographer who was very active. He died in the 1960s. All of these books treat with photography in one form or another, and some have real and some have fictional photographers in them. This one has a real photographer in his book, sort of, I don't know if I would call it the MacGuffin, but it's an engine for the narrative. And mostly I just years ago came across, not that many years ago, came across Mortensen's work, and it was so strange. I'm sure you've seen some of it. Some of his photos are quite well known, and they don't look like photographs. They look like they're lithographs or paintings. He was literally kind of pushed out of photographic history by Ansel Adams and the F-64 group. They are relatively few mentions of him in the classic texts of photography because his work was totally antithetical to what quote-unquote straight photographers believed in, which was that everything that you saw in a photo was supposed to, depict reality and nothing else. So, technique was involved, lighting, all of these things, but basically a photo was supposed to depict the real world. So the thought that you could take a photo and you would deliberately manipulate it to look different and not do it to just be like retouching to, get rid of a blemish or something like that was totally heretical to these people. And the fact that Mortensen was a very skilled photographer, he worked for Cecil B. DeMille, he worked with Lon Chaney Sr. He did a lot of work in Hollywood, and I think the Hollywood work also tainted him as well. And I don't want to give too much away, but he did. His work really did inspire Anton LaVey, which was quite a coup when I found that out. And you cannot find his books. They're just you can find some of his technical books. I have quite a few of them, which are not easy to find, but they're easier to find. He has two books, Monsters and Madonnas and The Command to Look, which will both, if you can find a copy, cost you hundreds of dollars. I don't think there's a single copy of The Command to Look that's available online at ABE or anywhere. I actually did a interlibrary loan search for it nationally, and there was I couldn't find it. Actually, I finally did find one copy, but and there really is a copy in Aleister Crowley's holdings at the Ransom Library at the University of Texas. So yes, that's William Mortensen, and in a nutshell. There's more of him in the book.
I'm really impressed by the technical precision that you use when you write. In Cleopatra Brimstone and in Generation Lost, you really capture the technical precision of things. And I was wondering, do you go out and pin butterflies? What's the research process like? Are you a photographer?
Turn men into insects.
Right.
I'm basically a geek. So I'm interested in things, and when I was a kid, I was really fascinated by entomology and lepidoptery, and they were things that I immersed myself in as a child that I still find interesting. So when I wrote that story, I just kind of went back and, I got some new books, but I sort of tried to re-educate myself about all the things, the many more things I knew about butterflies when I was 8 years old than I did when I was, 40. And I worked for about 8 years at the National Air and Space Museum of the Smithsonian, and I worked in their photo archives. And part of my job, I worked in their darkroom. And a lot of the job was extremely tedious. And because it was government work, there were a lot of people who were on payroll with a lot of time that they were happy to spend teaching me about photography. So I had this great opportunity to kind of learn about photography. And the part of it that I loved was being in the darkroom. Unfortunately, I found tragically that I myself was not a good photographer. And this was all black and white photography. It wasn't color photography. But I kind of learned enough to be dangerous. I learned enough that I knew about the techniques. And the rest of it, I just, do what one does nowadays. You read about it. I Google it and find books about it and things like that. Find people who are much more knowledgeable than me and steal their wisdom. You're all so quiet.
So in an interview, about 10 years ago in Strange Horizons, you talked about the fact that you're not a plot-driven writer, or you weren't at the time.
Shh, my students are here.
And that you were working on that.
I'm sorry?
And that you were working on that. Would you feel that was successful? And if so, what was your trick?
My trick was I had a wonderful friend who is also a friend of Eileen Gunn's, and maybe other people here, a guy named Bob Morales who was a brilliant writer and editor. who died very tragically about 6 weeks ago, unexpectedly. He's a year younger than me. And Bob was just a great, would read my work, and he just had a real gift for kind of homing in on things. And he, I don't know if you'd call him a story doctor, but he was good. Right, Eileen? He was good. And he was actually a Clarion grad.
He was at Clarion with me in 76.
Yeah, so anyway, Bob one day, I think it was with, I can't remember if it was Available Dark or Generation Loss, because he would always, he would read all my stuff, and after it was too late for me to do anything, when it was print, he would tell me what I should have fixed. And I would call him when I was having problems with the plot, and I said, Bob, can you help me with this? And I was going on and on. I was like, I've got to find a plot. I have to do this. And he said, no. He said, what you're doing, that is not plotting. You are not creating a plot. He said, all you're doing is making it complicated. He said, a plot is very, very simple. Keep it really simple. So at that point, I thought, okay. And I was mistaking, all of this kind of running around and coming up with this web of connections and things for plotting. So I still don't know that it's my strong suit, but it's actually a lot easier to do with a noir novel, with a thriller, because I think because there's a template there and there are certain conventions that you can follow. Basically, somebody's got to be dead, that the protagonist has to be threatened with death. You have to find something out, that there's sort of different plot points that you can tick off. So I kind of cheat when I write those books. I still don't know what I'm doing when I write anything else.
I know that you already talked a little bit about this to Clarion law students, but there's a lot of people here who are not in your class right now, and I was just wondering, since you're someone with a lot of experience in very different and varied genres, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about why you switch up genres so much and sort of the positives and negatives of switching genres.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's a good question, and I can share my advice my experience, so nobody will ever do what I did. Because basically I've written so many different things in so many different genres. Probably a dozen different ones over 25 years. And I did it because I wanted to do it, and because I grew up, as probably some people here of my age or older did, where you would just kind of read everything. And I never really, there was no internet. I was not aware of Clarion Workshop or science fiction conventions or things like that. So from my perspective, you could write a science fiction novel, and then you could also write the great American novel, and you could do all of these things. My role model, believe it or not, was Noel Coward, who did all of these things, and I thought, I want to do that. I want to try all these different things. And from a marketing perspective, it was probably, disastrous, because one, people would say, well, where do we put your books on the shelf? Are they literary fiction? Are they this? Are they that? And there's a publishing term that's become popular in the last 5 or 10 years, gaining traction. And basically, publishers want you to write the same thing or have something, written for the same audience over and over and over again, at least until you gain traction, you gain enough readers. And I think now, if I had to do it over again, I would probably go back and try to write, stick with something long enough. But I just have a very, really and truly, a low boredom threshold. And I would do something, and it's not like I felt like, okay, I perfected that, but I would do it and think, I want to try something different. But the book that was the most difficult to write was Generation Loss, because that was the first book that I wrote that did not have any kind of fantastical element at all. I'd sort of put my toes in the water with a few things, but this one had nothing, and I felt like I was working without a net, and it was very. It was a horrible experience. I hated writing that book. I really hated it. But, and some of it was because it just, kind of delved into material from my own life that was dark and difficult to deal with. And to deal with head on without having, the filter of the supernatural there. But once I finished doing it, I found that I actually liked this voice of this character, and I liked, there's something, I don't want to say that it's something easy, but something about writing within this convention, maybe because I grew up watching a lot of noir movies, and it's the second one was more fun to write, and this one is more fun to write. So, but the first one was not. And I like to, when I finished Generation Loss, the first thing I wrote after that was a story called Winter's Wife, which is a very straightforward fantasy story. And I was like, oh, thank God, it's the elves. Really, I was like, oh, I was so happy. I thought, oh, I'm writing about elves again. This is great. So it was a great relief to go back to that, not just because of the tone was different and not so dark, but because I really do love writing about that. I love that. There's a certain, as I'm sure those of you in the audience who are writers know, there's a certain frisson that you get, I think, from writing, Fantastica that you don't get from writing mainstream fiction. Or I don't get it, anyway. Your books. But thank you very much.